Howdy, friends, and welcome back to Wild Curiosity, the podcast where wonder fuels exploration, and in each episode, we dive into the untold stories of the natural world and the hidden details of our surroundings. My hope is to spark your curiosity and encourage you to wonder some more about the landscapes, histories, and adventures waiting for you just beyond the horizon. I'm Mandalynn, and today we're headed to the rugged mountaintops where the air is thin, the views are endless, and the only company is the wilderness itself. We're stepping into the world and legacy of fire lookouts, those iconic towers and cabins, standing tall or perched high above our national forests, quietly watching over the land for the first signs of smoke. How's it going, you guys? I'm so happy you're here. I figured I should take a second and introduce myself a little bit before we start this episode and give you a little information about me and what inspired me to start this podcast. I'm a Pacific Northwest native, born and raised in the state of Washington. I'm currently back in school full-time after close to around 13 years working as a hairstylist. Now I am pursuing my degree in geology, so wish me luck. It's quite the change and already has been so hard and so different, but I'm really excited for the future. I live with my husband, Jeff, my long-haired wiener dog, Hank, and our cat, little kitty. I know her name sucks. If you ever want to know more about that, let me know. I'd say I'm a pretty avid hiker and lover of type 2 fun. I've always been curious about the world around me, why places are named the way they are, what stories are hidden in the trails we hike, how an old mining town became a ghost town. What would be in the dirt here if I busted out my metal detector? Why is this lake named Alice Lake? Why are the dead trees in the forest twisted? My husband likes to call me Grandpa Mandalynn because I am in a bunch of Facebook groups for like metal detecting, geocaching, magnet fishing, and things found in walls, rock hounding groups, stuff like that. The majority of the people in those groups I feel are retired men 70 plus. I'm always the person noticing weird things no one else seems to see, and my brain has just always been in the background asking why about everything. I'm a huge podcast fan, so after listening to many over the years, I have always had a desire to start one. And so here we are. Don't really know where this is going to go, but I'm hoping that it can just feel like we're good friends in the car riding to or from an epic day in the mountains, and I'm blabbing on to you about an obscure thing about the mountain range or the strange markings on the trees, but you love it. And I get to teach you something you didn't even realize you wanted to know. I also want to state for the record that I literally have no idea what I'm doing. I have absolutely zero experience recording audio or editing anything more than an Instagram reel. So please bear with me and take it easy on me. I do want to keep the parameters of this podcast pretty loose. I want it to evolve naturally based on my interests and also yours. One week it could be about the Klondike Gold Rush, and then the next it could be about an incredible survival story in the harsh wilderness, or maybe the best hut-to-hut hiking treks you could do worldwide, or even why are national park signs that weird oblong rectangular shape and who makes them. I'd love to eventually have guests join me at some point and would love even more to hear from you guys and see what you wonder about and help you explore those things. I'm really looking forward to diving into this episode with you. It's going to be a really fun journey, and it's a subject that's really near and dear to my heart. Jeff and I were married in 2019 on top of Winchester Mountain in the North Cascades. At the top was a fire lookout, the first one I'd ever been to. At the time, I was just interested in getting really epic photos. I didn't realize that it would propel me to this giant adventure of trying to visit all 93 standing fire lookouts in the state of Washington, but it did. As of today, I've visited personally 41 of the 93, still standing. Still have a long way to go, but it has been a really incredible adventure, taking me places in the state that I probably would have never visited and really just made me obsessed with them and their history. The feelings you get when you're at a lookout are just insane. You can feel the history there, and you can see old nails, old things from people that used to live there. The views are always incredible. That's one thing I always say about fire lookouts is they were usually placed up high where you could see super far around you in order to obviously spot fires. So usually you're always going to get a super sick view. And who doesn't love a sick view? Alrighty, so anyways, let's get back on track and jump into the crazy history of fire lookouts. Grab your hiking boots, And let's venture up to those lonely towers and peaks, where history and the untamed wilderness collide. Before these fire lookouts dotted the high ridges, something catastrophic had to happen. A fire so immense, so powerful, it would forever change how we view fire management in the wild. In 1910, the largest wildfire in U.S. history tore through the Northwest, scorching over 3 million acres across Idaho, Montana, and Washington, and leaving a trail of devastation. It became known as the Big Burn, and it set the stage for the creation of a system designed to prevent such disasters from ever happening again. The Big Burn is also called the Great Fire of 1910, or the Big Blowup. It occurred during a dry summer when a series of lightning strikes ignited multiple blazes, eventually merging into one massive inferno. The U.S. Forest Service, which had only been established 5 years earlier in 1905, was unprepared to handle the scale of the disaster. Despite their limited resources, firefighters, often inexperienced, fought bravely to save towns, forests, and lives. Smoke darkened skies across North America, from Canada to New York, and even affected visibility as far away as Boston and Greenland. The inferno claimed 85 lives before rains and cooler temperatures finally brought relief. You can't really talk about the Big Burn without mentioning Ed Pulaski. Edward Crockett Pulaski was a U.S. Forest Service ranger based in Wallace, Idaho. Pulaski worked as a miner, railroad worker, and ranch foreman before joining the Forest Service in 1908. On August 20th, 1910, Pulaski was credited with saving all but 5 of his 45-man crew during what is known as one of the worst wildfires the U.S. had ever seen. Pulaski was supervising crews on the West Fork of Placer Creek, about 5 miles south of Wallace, Idaho, when the fire suddenly broke out of control, overwhelming the crew. Drawing on his knowledge of the area and the dynamics of forest fires, Pulaski led his men to safety in an abandoned prospector's mine. After ordering his crew into the mine tunnel, he threatened to shoot with his pistol any man who left. Lying prone on the tunnel floor, all but 5 of the firefighters survived, though Pulaski himself suffered burns, eye and lung damage, and was temporarily blinded by the fire and smoke. Sadly, the 2 horses with them died from smoke inhalation. The mine entrance, now known as the Pulaski Tunnel, is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Pulaski remained with the Forest Service until 1929. Though the Great Fire's smoke and flames had damaged his lungs and eyes, during that time he petitioned the government for money to care for the graves of dozens of firefighters killed by the 1910 fire, and for compensation for his wounds. Pulaski is widely credited for the invention of the Pulaski tool in 1911, a hand tool commonly used in wildland firefighting still to this day. It's a combination hand tool with a mattock for digging on one side and an axe for chopping on the other. Pulaski's legacy lives on through the tool, which has become an indispensable part of wildfire management. It's a pretty cool story, and you can actually do a hike to the Pulaski Tunnel. I was just looking on All Trails. It's just a few miles outside of Wallace, Idaho, and the trail is a 4-mile round trip trek. It does say that there are some pretty steep areas, but it sounds like it's worth it after looking at the pictures. It brings hikers to an overlook across the creek of the Nicholson Mine entrance, better known as the Pulaski Tunnel. And it looks crazy. The mine is gated off, like you can't go inside the actual adit or the tunnel now, but the timbers that are on the outside opening are all charred and burnt still from the fire. So it's crazy to see that and just how close it came to them. I would totally love to do that hike. The Big Burn brought national attention to the importance of wildfire management, leading to the establishment of manned fire lookouts on high peaks across forested areas. Lookouts were placed approximately every 15 to 20 miles apart, mostly on high points or peaks. Many of the early lookouts were just camps with tents or cabins. Later, the Forest Service built towers to get the lookouts above the trees surrounding them. Lookout personnel would come up to take their stations around the end of June and serve until mid-September in most years. They would generally work 6 days a week and would be required to record and report weather 3 times a day and scan for fires every 2 hours, including during the night. They also had to cut and split firewood, carry water to their lookout, wash windows regularly, maintain trails, and if they spotted a fire, they used to have to go and try to put it out themselves. Initially, the lookouts were connected to the ranger stations by a network of old crank telephones that used heavy galvanized wire. They could also talk to nearby lookouts to compare notes, or if they spotted a fire, they would coordinate with other nearby lookout towers, and a fire crew would then be dispatched, or the lookouts themselves would be the first responders, often alone. Okay, so let's talk about some architectural styles of lookouts. There are so many that were used at different times in different places. Sometimes the type is kind of area specific. The D6 was a cupola house design, with the main floor being 12 by 12 feet and having a 1/4 sized second floor observatory, built mostly during the 1920s. So it was like one of the earlier models. There's not very many of them left. Just in conversation, I was told by somebody that the D6 kind of got phased out because the lookouts got sick of going up in the cupola area and being all cramped, and that's how they were spotting fires. They wouldn't be up there all the time, and they'd be missing fires. So then they decided to make a new plan, which is by far the most popular live-in lookout they ever came out with. It came in 3 generations, and it's called the L4. It has a 14 by 14 foot wood frame cab, windows all the way around, sitting on the ground or atop pole or timber towers up to 100 feet tall. The other one that I have been to quite a bit is the R6, which is a foot bigger on each side than the L4. So it's a standard 15 by 15 foot frame lookout house built from 1953 forward. The roof is flat and extends beyond the cabin for a few feet to provide shade. R6 refers to Region 6, the U.S. Forest Service, Washington and Oregon, the originator of the design. The last one I want to mention was the Aeromotor C39. So Aeromotor, the company, created so many towers. As far as I know, they are a lot more common on the East Coast. The Aeromotor MC39, likely the most popular of the steel designs, is a heavily galvanized, freestanding, batter-legged, hurricane-proof structure with a 7x7 metal cab ones. But I was at the Armstrong Mountain, and it's an Aeromotor MC39, and it's a 100-foot steel tower built in 1939 and has been abandoned since 1952. And when we went there, it was so creepy. We drove our old van out there, and it was like a bumpy, dirt road, started getting worse and worse, and then all of a sudden the road just stopped. It was like completely overgrown by bushes and grass, so we just got out and walked it. There was really no road left, and it was just kind of eerie, really dry, like dead forest. And it was so tall. Heights, there were a few dozen that were 120 feet tall, and the tallest 176 feet. Scary. I've heard that, they kind of sway in the wind and move when someone coming up the stairs. So kind of crazy, but it says fire detection process was also aided over the years by an invention developed by U.S. Forest Service forester William Bushnell Osborne Jr. Osborne first invented a finder in Oregon in 1911 using a rotating steel disc with attached sighting mechanisms. This instrument allowed lookouts to accurately pinpoint the geographic location of forest fires by sighting distant smoke through the device. Further modifications and technological developments were made by Osborne to the Firefinder over the next 30 years. The Osborne Firefinder was widely used by Forest Service lookouts throughout the 20th century, and production of the devices by various companies continues even today. It was really cool. Actually, the 40th lookout I visited is called Sugarloaf Lookout. We went there with Hank, car camped the night before, and then walked up because it is one of the very few still staffed lookouts in Washington State. And we had to wait to go up. You can visit between 9:30 and 6. And so we went up there, talked to the lookout. He was a really nice guy, originally from North Carolina, but lives in Virginia. And he drove this old Honda CR-V up there, and I couldn't believe he drove it up those roads and all the way from Virginia with his dog West. And so we got to go inside and see an active lookout, like the walkie-talkies going off. He was making coffee, boiling water on the stove, and it was just really cool. He had the Firefinder in the middle, and these are rare, especially today if it's not staffed, to have that. And if they are inside, usually the lookout's locked up to the public because they've been stolen and vandalized over the years, and it's really sad. Another pretty important tool of the trade for fire lookouts was the lightning stool. These stools, also known as hot seats, are wooden stools with glass legs that fire lookouts use to sit on during lightning storms. The glass and wood are poor conductors of electricity, so the lookout is less likely to be shocked if lightning strikes the tower. Which lightning does strike towers pretty often. Usually they are grounded. The ones that are obviously staffed are grounded and have a lightning rod. The Sugarloaf lookout that we saw the firefinder at recently, he also had 2 stools. He had like the old school one, which is like really kind of just like a step stool. Imagine like a wood step stool, really small, just big enough to put both your feet on. And then it has like these glass insulators on the legs. So lookouts would have to stand on that during storms. This guy had like a normal bar stool, like a round wooden bar stool with the glass insulators at the bottom. I'll post pictures on Instagram of both of those. On July 25th, 1925, Paul Blixendorfer, Forest Service lookout stationed at South Baldy, northeast of Usk, was killed by a stroke of lightning during the electrical storm early Sunday morning, July 12th. Blixendorfer and his companion lookout, Orrin Blake, were sleeping on the floor of the cabin, having given up their beds to Assistant Forest Supervisor F.T. Carroll and Ranger J.J. Murray, who were visiting the cabin. The lightning cut 3 streaks across the floor of the cabin. Blixendorfer lived long enough to raise up and inquire what happened, then fell dead. Blake was stunned by the stroke and received slight burns. The 2 men in the beds were not injured. That was an article from the Newport Miner back in 1925. I couldn't find the original article that I had read. Jeff and I went to South Baldy this summer. Craziest road ever. I can't believe we drove it. I saw a plaque there. There's a plaque on this big rock, and it was for this Paul guy. And I looked up his story later, and the one that I read said the lightning strike actually came through the stovepipe. So him and that other guy were sleeping on the floor, being gentlemen, giving up their beds for these forest supervisors. And the lightning came through the stovepipe and then got him while he was sleeping on the floor. I guess sometimes it doesn't pay to be a gentleman. Here's another instance. On June 23rd, 1931, sometime after 5 p.m., a bolt of lightning instantly killed James Butler in the lookout house. The body was discovered 6 p.m. the next day by Forest Service officials who went there to investigate why he did not answer the telephone. His body was found in the corner of the lookout where he had evidently been standing looking at the storm. The bolt of lightning passed along a guy wire anchoring the cabin, struck Ben on the right temple, and the main part came out of his foot just below the ankle, leaving a good-sized hole indicating terrific voltage. Part of the electricity escaped through the other leg just above the knee. He had evidently been washing some clothes as there was a tub on the stove partially filled with water and the clothes were in a basin on the other side of the room. The floor near where he had stood was covered with water. He had called Stanley Lake, employee of Forest Service, before the storm around 4:45, saying there was a gad storm brewing and for them not to call him again. The next day, Ben did not answer the phone. En route to investigate, halfway up the mountain, Ranger Stanley Lake met Butler's dog on the trail, and the two hastened to the cabin where they found Ben. The body was brought out by the Sheriff Coroner Moon and a party of forest officials. Butler was 19 years of age and was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Edward Butler of Atoll, Idaho. That's so sad. So this lookout is called Butler Lookout. It's on Blacktail Mountain in Idaho, but after Ben died, they changed the name to Butler Mountain, Butler Lookout. By the late 1930s, over 5,000 fire lookout towers had been constructed. Of the 5,000 lookouts, 611 were built by President Roosevelt's Green Army, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC. During World War II, many lookouts were used as air raid warning sites to spot potential enemy bombers. By the 1950s, the lookouts were starting to be staffed by women, notably a woman named Hallie M. Daggett. She was the first woman ever to be hired for a field position by the Forest Service and served 15 seasons at Eddy Gulch Lookout. Although women have been Forest Service employees since 1905, for many decades, very few were hired for field work. Yet as early as 1902, during the General Land Office days, wives, who were not employees, sometimes accompanied their forest ranger husbands into the wild forests. One of the first accounts of women employed as a forest fire lookout comes from California on the Klamath National Forest. The lookout was Hallie M. Daggett, who worked at Eddy's Gulch Lookout Station atop Klamath Peak in the summer of 1913 and for the next 14 years. A 1914 article in the American Forestry magazine describes her work. Few women would care for such a job, fewer still would seek it, and still less would be able to stand the strain of the infinite loneliness, or the roar of the violent storms which sweep the peak, or the menace of the wild beasts which roam the heavily wooded ridges. Miss Daggett, however, not only eagerly longed for the station but secured it. After considerable exertion, and now she declares that she enjoyed the life and was intensely interested in the work she had to do. Some of the Forest Service men predicted that after a few days of life on the peak, she would telephone that she was frightened by the loneliness and the danger, but she was full of pluck and high spirit. She grew more and more in love with the work. Even when the telephone wires were broken and when, for a long time, she was cut off from communication with the world below, she did not lose heart. She not only filled the place with all the skill which a trained man would have shown, but she desires to be reappointed when the fire season opens this year. In describing her life as a lookout, Hallie said, "I grew up with a fierce hatred of the devastating fires and welcomed the Forest Service force, which arrived to combat them. But not until the lookout stations were installed did there come an opportunity to join what had up till then been a man's fight. Although my sister and I had frequently been able to help on small things such as extinguishing spreading campfires or carrying supplies to the firing line, then, thanks to the liberal-mindedness and courtesy of officials in charge of our district, I was given the position of lookout, with a firm determination to make good, for I knew that the appointment of a woman was rather in the nature of an experiment, and naturally felt that there was a great deal due to men who had been willing to give me the chance. It was quite a swift change in 3 days from San Francisco civilization and sea level to a solitary cabin on a still more solitary mountain. 6,444 feet elevation and 3 hours hard climb from everywhere. But in spite of the fact that almost the very first question asked by everyone was, "Isn't it awfully lonesome up there?" I never felt a moment's longing to retrace the step. That is, not after the first half hour following my sister's departure with the pack animals. I want to mention a couple more lookout stories I found. This one's from Mount Rainier. There used to be one on Anvil Rock, which is pretty close. It's on Mount Rainier, basically. I guess the weather there is pretty gnarly. But this is from September 6, 1936. And the title is Mount Rainier Fire Lookout Declared Satisfying Job. Paradise Valley, Mount Rainier National Park, add to satisfying occupations a fire lookout's job near the 9,600-foot level on Mount Rainier. It's 14 summers now for Wallace Mead, 64, atop Anvil Rock with his firefighting equipment looking over the world below. Major O.A. Tomlinson, park superintendent, said today that the prospects for a longer fire season this year, although the park has been comparatively free of blazes this summer, might keep Mead at his work well into the 8th or the 10th of the month, Tomlinson said. This year, however, it may be longer. Mountain climbers who, fatigued and perspiring, although only halfway to the 14,400-foot summit, have come to know Mead and welcome his cheery greetings and hot tea, know his answer to that. "I've never been lonesome up here yet," he says. "In the winter, it's back to my service station at Morton, but in summer, he has long experiences to tell. He's forgotten the number of times he's climbed Mount Rainier. Only twice in his experience up there has it ever rained. It snows for precipitation and the temperature is below freezing every night, with the wind sweeping off the snowfields. He can always see his visitors long before they arrive, toiling up the snow. One of the dangers, the possibility of the station being struck by lightning, is avoided by lightning arresters placed all about. He spent 2 hours once on a tiny insulated stool as electricity played on the wires and ground cables, which hold the cabin to the ground. Cooking is difficult because of the altitude. Snow is his source of water. Once I took 2 days and 100 gallons of water to cook a kettle of navy beans. He wants the job again next summer. It's that type 2 fun. Okay, this is from the News Tribune in Tacoma, Washington, August 21st, 1935. The title is Bald Eagles Gang Up on Fire Lookout. A pair of birds chase warden in Olympus Reservation. Also back then, too, all the forests and places were named different things, but Wallace R. Edwards, 22, fire lookout at Dodger Point near Ludden Peak, Mount Olympus National Monument, was attacked recently by a pair of bald eagles which chased him more than a third of a mile down the trail before trees broke up in the pursuit of the birds. And now fire lookouts everywhere are watching for the bird, which is our national emblem, as well as for fires. As Edward was on his way down from Ludden Peak, 6,000 feet high, the two birds, each having a wing spread of more than 4 feet, bore down to within 3 feet of him. By waving his stick, he was able to drive them back into the air. After maneuvering to get between Edwards and the sun, the hostile birds again attacked, but were repulsed. The lookout believes he must have passed near the bird's nest, causing their aggravation, but he did not see the nest nor any young birds. Edward reports that 6 small eagles frequently were seen from his lookout until a few days ago when 2 large birds, believed to have been those which attacked him, drove the small eagles away from the vicinity. I thought that was funny. There's countless other notable lookouts. A lot of famous writers have spent time as fire lookouts. There's like a big list on Wikipedia that you can look at. I'll link it in the show notes. I also wanted to just add in here really quick that the highest lookout site in the world is Fairview Peak Lookout in Colorado, which sits at an elevation of 13,214 feet. Prior to European colonization, fire was an established part of the landscape's life cycle. Indigenous peoples used prescribed burning as a crucial part of their relationship to the land. Fire that occurred without human action, like those caused by lightning strikes, were also allowed to burn without intervention. European settlers began the practice of fire suppression and barred indigenous burning practices. Forest fires became more rare, but they also grew bigger, which then led to an ever-intensifying strategy of restricting fires. Fire lookouts were erected and staffed as part of the Forest Service's new fire management strategy: extinguish all fires as quickly and completely as possible. Despite the Forest Service's efforts, the fires continued to grow in size and frequency. It wasn't until the 1970s when scientific research emerged, confirming the benefits of forest fires for forest ecology, that the Forest Service began to reassess its approach to managing forest fires. Since then, the service has attempted to shift its approach. Recently, Prescribed Burn Association have started a collaborative effort with Indigenous peoples to facilitate controlled burns and allow tribes to reclaim this practice. After the mid-20th century, and in fact, many lookouts were closed during that period as fire watch culture and technology changed. During the 60s and 70s, the U.S. Forest Service stopped maintaining many of the defunct lookout buildings, and the structures became a liability. The vantage points that make the views so amazing came at a price for the buildings. The structures are subject to high winds, extreme weather, and constant deterioration. They need regular maintenance, often more labor hours than budgeted for by the Forest Service or the National Park Service. When lookouts were staffed, even for just a few months of the year, there was a person on site full-time who could replace window panes, touch up paint, and do any carpentry repairs. But once the buildings were no longer used annually, their fates began to vary widely. For many no longer active lookouts, there simply is not funding or staffing to maintain them to safety standards. Ironically, after dutifully serving lifetimes in the prevention of fires, these structures end up being intentionally burned to the ground. Beginning in the 70s, organizations began adopting lookouts to help maintain them. In some cases, existing organizations such as the local Alpine Club or the Mountaineers chapter adopted a nearby lookout. Other times, a Friends of group formed to preserve a lookout. These dedicated groups often restored lookouts sufficiently enough for them to be added to the National Register of Historic Places in addition to providing ongoing care and attention. A few lookouts are still staffed, and some in the national parks are maintained and used as needed by the Park Service. Most of the rest have been forgotten, and there is no telling what the destinies might be. I wanted to spend a little time talking about the preservation efforts now and also renting lookouts. So some lookouts are now open for the public to rent and enjoy. As time passes, I think more and more lookouts that are still standing will become rentable. If you want to check it out and stay at a lookout, the best place to reserve a Forest Service lookout tower, and recreation.gov is the best site for that. It'll provide availability options and tower details and the ability to reserve a tower. The one issue that I have ran into is availability, so people are really on it and they book up very quick. Jeff and I did stay at Stellico Lookout here in Washington, and it was amazing. We did it in March, and so we did have to hike to the top. It's like a 2-mile, pretty steep road. So we backpacked up there. There's no water up there, so we brought all of our own water, and it was like one of the best things. Like, I'll always remember that. It was such an epic thing to have it all to ourselves and stay in there. We just got lucky, actually. He just randomly was looking on that site and it was just open for some reason, and that never happened, so he snagged it. Another way that you can support but also rent is join lookout groups on Facebook in your area. I have found that people that have booked a lookout for a night that want to give it up because they can't make it will post it on there. So that's a good way to snag one if you're lucky. Another way to find out more about lookouts in your area, no matter what state you're in, a lot of states do still have them, even if it's just a couple. Doesn't matter what part of the country you're in or what country you're in, really. I believe there's around 25 countries that have or have had fire lookouts in them. If you'd like to support further, you can look into your local chapter of the Forest Fire Lookout Association. Grandpa Mandalynn is a proud member, and I just want to encourage you guys to consider supporting or joining the FFLA. You can check out their website. I'll link it below, but ffla.org. I want to read a little bit about the association. So their mission says they were founded in 1990, and it's an organization involved in research of current and former forest lookout sites, ground cabins, and early forest fire detection methods. It promotes the protection, enjoyment, and understanding of lookout. The organization encourages efforts of public groups and others in the restoration of forest fire lookouts. Some lookout projects are undertaken by chapters of the organization itself. The Forest Fire Lookout Association's bylaws prohibit the lobbying for retaining lookout operator jobs, and there is no political connection to any such groups that encourage these efforts. The membership is composed of lookout enthusiasts, hikers, conservationists, forest fire personnel, foresters, story writers, and members of the environmental community. They have been involved in all aspects of fire lookouts since 1990, many of which include the organizing of lookout restorations, providing grants for lookout projects, documenting lookout sites, historical research of lookouts, assembling of programs to increase lookout awareness, documenting anecdotes of lookout operators past and present. They have conferences twice a year, an Eastern and Western United States one, and in Canada. They have a whole board of directors, and if you are a member, which it only costs $15 for the whole year, you will get a quarterly copy of their newsletter, which is a magazine called Lookout Network. And I don't know, it's just really cool to get in the mail and fun to see what lookouts are doing what, or what people are doing what to lookouts nationwide. They maintain the National Historic Lookout Register and information about former lookout sites. The activities of 55 chapters, affiliated lookout support groups include historic research maintenance and much volunteer staffing. So I'll add all the links below for that. They also honestly have some dope merch. I have a shirt that I love and I totally want to get a hat. And they also sell mugs, patches, koozies, books, whatever. And yeah, pretty sick stuff. So go check it out. All right, I wanted to take this time to touch on some personal stories from my trips to lookouts, and then also some that I still need to visit. We recently went back to Winchester Lookout, where we got married for our anniversary and camped at the top. We would have slept in the lookout, but there was like 12 college kids there, so we stayed in a tent. But man, that was amazing. Finally getting to bask in the views and experience an epic sunset. On our wedding day, literally, you guys, we get to the top completely socked in by clouds. You could not see anything. You're supposed to see mountains like 360, and we saw nothing. You can see into Canada there. Like there's a Canadian and American border peak. You can see Mount Shuckson, Mount Baker, so much of the Cascades, truly views for days. We hiked there for the sole purpose of getting pictures with the mountains. I could have cried. Seriously, I was so sad. Our pictures turned out moody and amazing. Thankfully, we had awesome photographers and they were like, we feel bad about your background. So the next day we met up with them near Mount Baker and they took really beautiful and insane photos of us there. We got 2 days of photos for one, which is nice. Actually, it's all thanks to them, the Foxes, Gabby and Brandon, our photographers, that we ever went to that lookout. They chose the location based on what we liked. Thanks, Gabby and Brandon. I will put their Instagram handle below and you guys can check out their pictures. They're great people and do super sick mountain and outdoor elopements. Another personal story was Thorpe Mountain. This is totally a me thing that I would do, which I did. We car camped like near the trailhead so that we didn't have to drive out there. The next morning, our friends met us there. We had Hank and they came out with their dog. And when they got there, I was like, okay, I just got to put my shoes on. Start looking for my shoes. Can't find them. And we're like deep in the woods. And so I definitely forgot my hiking boots. And I was like, what do I do? All I have is Tevas. What am I going to do? I had to hike almost 8 miles in Tevas, which usually isn't a big deal. But there's freaking snow on the trail and roots. And it was wet and muddy. And my feet are slipping in those things. And I'm like post-holing in Tevas. So it really sucked. Like I was getting stabbed in the side of the foot with stuff, and friends still say, we can't believe you did that. But dude, I can't come this far and not cross off a lookout. When we did Haybrook Lookout near Index, we had just gotten to the lookout. And before we climbed the stairs, this group of people came from the back way you can get there on a road. And they said that they had just came face to face with a giant cougar. And since then, I have seen on, I don't know if a lookout group or my cougar sightings group, that the same thing has happened multiple times. So if you do Haybrook Lookout near Index, Washington, look out for the kitties. When we did Ptolemy Peak, we got caught in this insane windstorm. And I don't know why. The logic just isn't quite there. It was like sideways raining and insane wind, like it could blow you off the mountain. And we just huddled down underneath the like stairs and deck against this like door because it was closed, so you couldn't go inside, and just tried to wait for the wind to pass. It never did. So we're like, okay, let's go down. Literally no one was on the trail either. The weather was bad. I can't remember what time of year we did it. Then as soon as we started walking down and getting a little lower, the wind was way better. And we're like, oh, it's probably just because we were on top of a peak. Duh. Right after I got my Outback, it just had like stock tires, and we took it to Tyee Lookout, and I drove like super far on this road. It was just all spiky, crazy rocks. And thankfully nothing bad happened. But then a couple months later, we went to Burley Mountain Lookout, which is pretty close to us. So we've gone there a few times and popped a tire. Yeah, that's a big thing with lookouts, is they are crazy to get to, a lot of them. So you just got to be prepared. When we did Park Butte, that was really cool to be on the same trail that takes you to climb and summit Mount Baker. It splits off at a Y, and you go left to go to Park Butte, right to Mount Baker. But it was just cool to see the climbers going up that way. We got up there. It was completely socked in by clouds, which sometimes is a thing that happens here in the beautiful Northwest. And there was someone there from like Illinois, and it's first come, first serve there. This guy's like kind of hogging the bed. And I think he just wanted to be like, this is mine for the night. He wanted to make sure that he for sure got it. He didn't like move from the bed the whole time we were in there. It was hilarious. We're like, dude, we're not staying. Did a little geocaching up there, found a cool ammo can, and these cowboys showed up also on horses. They had spurs on and they were drinking cowboy coffee. Some future ones that I have to visit are Dodger Point, actually the one that I talked about earlier with the bald eagles attacking the dude. And that used to be a 27-mile round trip journey, which is already long, but a washout on the Olympic Hot Springs Road adds 13 miles round trip to the adventure. So now it is 40 miles round trip, but it sounds like such a great backpacking trip. So I think it's on the books for next year, hopefully. Apparently, there's not very much water out there, though, so you do have to carry a lot of water, which I hate doing because it's so heavy. But you do see an old homestead called Michael's Cabin, built by Doc Ludd. It was last occupied by Cougar Mike, a local hunter. Then 3 miles from the trailhead, you can enjoy the splendid Humes Ranch, hand-hewn from local cedar and fir in 1905 by William Humes, who arrived in the Elwha River area from New York while en route to the Klondike. Along with his brother and cousin, Humes was so enchanted with the Elwha River that he set up a homestead site. A half a mile beyond the Humes Ranch is a beautiful Dodger Point suspension bridge and the Grand Canyon of the Elwha. After the bridge, the long ridge trail will slowly and steadily climb all the way to Dodger Point. Water along the trail is scarce, but just below the summit of Dodger are meadows with water source and few established camp spots. And it has 360-degree views of the entirety of the Olympics. You can see all the way to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, over to Hurricane Ridge, and gaze at the beautiful Mount Olympus. In July, the meadows are filled with wildflowers. Another that I need to do, which sounds pretty crazy as well, is Desolation Peak. Desolation is one of the tougher fire lookouts to reach and requires some advanced planning. There are really 4 primary approaches to reach the trailhead. On foot on the East Bank Trail, on a water taxi from Ross Lake Resort, or by paddling Ross from either Josemine on the north or from Diablo Lake to the south. If you paddle, start early and be very prepared. The water also rarely gets over 50 degrees. Check the National Park website for more information on Ross Lake paddling and campsites. So that just sounds wild. Once you get to the trailhead, don't underestimate the trail to Desolation. It's a steady, consistent climb, gaining more than 4,000 feet all the way to the summit. No camping is allowed on the summit, and the only nearby campground is Desolation Camp, a mile below the summit, requiring a backcountry permit. This next one's kind of a big deal. It's pretty notorious around here as well. It's called Three Fingers Lookout. The road is washed out 8 miles from the trailhead, and it's a very challenging hike to a lookout in the mountain loop area. Hike or bike a road, then along a trail to gorgeous goat flats. From there, the route kicks up in difficulty as it accesses Tin Can Gap. The final push up ladders rebarred into rock is exposed, and sure-footedness is an absolute must at the lookout. Three Fingers is no doubt one of the most intimidating fire lookouts in Washington to reach, thanks to its infamous ladders and long, potentially technical approach. When it comes to dramatic perches, though, it most certainly can't be beat. Look up pictures right now. It's friggin' insane. The lookout sits atop a spectacular pinnacle of basalt that is also the 12th most prominent peak in Washington state. Three Fingers is one of the only 2 gable roof lookouts, known as Grange Halls, remaining on Mount Baker Snoqualmie Forest. The first ascent of Three Fingers was in 1929 by Harry Beadle and Darrington District Ranger Harold Ingalls. In 1930, Beadle, Ingalls, Frank Benesh, and a crew began construction of the Three Fingers Lookout, overlooking thousands of acres of old-growth timber on the Snoqualmie National Forest. The effort was amazing and took nearly 3 years to complete. The top 15 feet of the summit was blasted off to make room for the lookout, a trail was built, and a telephone line was strung up from the Boulder River Valley below. So, wish me luck on that one. Okay, and the last one that I'm going to mention that I still need to do, amongst the 52 that I still need to do, is Mount Adams. Did you know there is a still standing fire lookout on the summit of Mount Adams? Sure enough, the tattered remains of a 100-plus-year-old D6 cupola lookout remain today, making the structure the highest elevation lookout in Washington state. Many have climbed Adams unaware of its existence. The old lookout spends much of its time entombed in deep snow and ice, only visible for a few weeks in late summer or early fall during dry years. The Forest Service first began moving materials to the summit of Adams in 1917 with the plan to construct a D6 cupola. This was certainly one of the tougher lookouts to reach in the United States. In fact, it took nearly 4 years to successfully haul all the materials to the summit due to snowdrifts that continually buried the frame and structure. Mules were used to carry supplies as far as Crescent Glacier, roughly 3,000 to 4,000 feet below the summit. Then Forest Service crews used ropes and sleds to pull materials the rest of the way. The lookout was finally completed in 1920, though only remained in service a short time between 1921 and 24, before being retired in 25. Not surprisingly, lookouts had issues with visibility thanks to the blinding snowstorms and cloud cover. In 1932, miners began extracting sulfur from the summit vent on Mount Adams, and while living in the cupola, they added a rustic shack and lean-to which remain today. Many of these descriptions I got in part from the Hiking Washington's Fire Lookouts book. Fire lookouts have long stood as quiet guardians of our forests, and by understanding their history and significance, we can also be guardians of their legacy and the natural spaces. Whether still in use today or preserved as historical landmarks, these towers remind us of the delicate balance between humans and nature, a balance we must work to protect. So I really encourage you guys to visit these places, but to take care of them and to encourage others that you're with or everyone just to take care of these wild spaces that we're still blessed to have and not to ruin them. I just want to spread the knowledge so that they get taken care of. If you haven't visited a fire lookout, I highly recommend it. Do some research on what's close to you. They really have been a super life-changing thing for me. They are for you too. A lot of the information I got today for this episode was from a book that I have from Amber Casali. I've used also willheitweb.com, which is Eric Wilhite. I think he's the 4th person to ever finish the 93 fire lookout list, and he's super knowledgeable. His website has so many articles. He goes really deep into the history of every single lookout, and he's visiting every single lookout site as well, which there are near 700 in Washington state alone. So yeah, really good resource. Also Trail Chick, I believe her name is Chris. I use her website all the time too. She's also done the 93 lookouts and has a wealth of knowledge and information about them as well. So I'll link all of their websites below and you can check them out. All the research I did, which was a lot, will be in the show notes. I feel like there's still so much that I could touch on. I'll probably be touching on about lookouts the entire time I have this podcast. So just stay tuned on there for stories and posts of lookouts and their history. There's just so much rich culture attached to them. But I hope to have sparked an interest in you. I'm not really promoting going to these crazy places. Please always carry the 10 essentials, carry a beacon or a way to contact someone if something were to go wrong. Definitely let at least one person know where you're going and when you plan to be back, and just visit at your own risk. There's lots of bushwhacking, flat tires, sometimes no turnarounds on the craziest roads like Hart's Pass, which is the highest road in Washington, over 7,000 feet that I drove on, and some scrambling that you will be doing at many of these places. I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for listening. It means the world to me. This is like completely independently done. I'm a total noob and just really hoping that I can stay consistent with this. This podcast for now is going to be bi-weekly. So every 2 weeks on Thursday morning, it will be released. You should be able to listen on all platforms by the time you hear this episode. And I guess that wraps up our adventure into the legacy of fire lookouts. I hope you enjoyed exploring the history, stories, and experiences of these incredible towers and cabins as much as I have. Remember, the next time you find yourself on a trail or mountain peak, take a moment to look out and wonder about the world around you. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share Wild Curiosity with fellow adventurers and those who love a good story. Your support helps me keep exploring and uncovering more of these wild tales. So also please email me wildcuriositypodcast@gmail.com. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you guys. I would love to know what sparks your curiosity. What do you wonder about? Let's dive in and explore together. So until then, stay curious and explore the wilds. Thanks. Bye.